My name is Andrea Whistler, and I serve as Executive Director of the Center for Social Justice Research, Teaching, and Service here at Georgetown University. On behalf of the Center for Social Justice, the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, the Georgetown Office of Fellowships, Awards, and Research, and the Office of Advancement, I am pleased to welcome you here today to our Homecoming Showcase of International Social Justice Research. Today, we have the opportunity to learn from 4 Georgetown students and an alum who have all conducted rigorous, compelling, and necessary social justice research in 4 diverse corners of the world. The role of research in the creation and sustaining of a more socially just, equitable, and humane world cannot be undervalued. Social justice research has the potential through its direct application to aid in resolving concrete social problems, organizing social change efforts, influencing public policy, meeting community-based needs, or transforming institutions. The presentations today will ensure you of that fact, as well as of the need to continue supporting young researchers to pursue engaged and activist research that serves the common good and makes a broader impact. Each presentation today will be approximately about 10 minutes, and then we will end the session with a question and answer period for all the presenters before we have lunch. It is my honor to introduce to you our first presenter, Annie Dale. Annie is a senior in the college studying government and justice and peace. Annie will share research she conducted as a Berkeley Center Education and Social Justice Research Fellow this past summer in Cambodia. Annie.
Thank you, Andrea. Good morning and happy homecoming. Thank you for taking the time on homecoming to come and celebrate some really interesting experiences that some Hoyas have had doing research abroad. So as Andrea said, my name is Annie Dale and I am a senior in the college. I have a double major in Spanish and government and a minor in justice and peace studies. I'm here to talk about today my experiences as a summer 2013 Education and Social Justice Fellow. So this fellowship is sponsored by the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs and the Center for Social Justice, and it just completed its 4th year of sending 4 Georgetown students to all corners of the globe to build knowledge about a deep connection between global poverty and education. Focusing on the work of Jesuit secondary and post-secondary institutions, the Education and Social Justice Fellows are required to gather information on some of the world's most pressing education issues through interviews, analysis of best practices, and then finally sharing their report and conclusions with a wider audience. During my time as a fellow, I completed over 20 interviews and gathered a lot of information, so today you're just seeing a bit of a sneak peek of my final presentation. So this May, as an Education and Social Justice Fellow, I traveled to the small Southeast Asian country of Cambodia for 3 weeks of research. Through research before my arrival, I noticed an extraordinarily sharp increase of school dropout rates in Cambodian children between grades 3 and 4, or 4 and 5. So depending on the school, that is between primary and secondary school. So I dedicated my time in Cambodia to researching why this sharp increase in dropout occurs and what's being done to help it. So while in Cambodia, I lived in its leading rice-producing province called Battambang among Cambodian neighbors and other international volunteers. The Apostolic Prefecture of Battambang and the amazing Father Enrique Figueiredo, or as he's known to all who know him, Father Kike, he hosted me and allowed me to tag along with their education and outreach teams. Cambodia's history provides a really rich and complicated basis for my research on education. It's essential to mention the horrific Cambodian genocide perpetrated in the 1970s by the Khmer Rouge under the rule of the dictator Pol Pot. In the massacre of over 2 million Cambodians, the Khmer Rouge specifically targeted the educated class and regarded traditional education with undiluted hostility. They executed thousands of teachers and converted many schools into concentration camps. So the effects of this absolute destruction are still tangible in Cambodia's education system today, 30 years after the fall of the Khmer Rouge. The genocide eliminated a whole generation, and it left a population with 38% of its people under the age of 18. The genocide unfortunately also left an unfathomable need for education with a complete lack of support for educational institutions. So with these past events haunting Cambodia's presence, I turned to over 20 Cambodians, teachers, students, principals, government workers, and volunteers alike, to get some answers to my question: why is there such a staggering dropout rate, specifically between secondary and primary schools? So UNICEF reports that while school participation for both male and female in Cambodia is 85% for primary schools, secondary school participation is only at 44%. Through my research, I identified 4 contributing factors that encourage youth dropouts between grades 4 and 5. These factors are a lack of parental support, financial inaccessibility, physical inaccessibility, and forced child labor. So today I will focus on one of these factors, the one that I found most compelling, and that is the social justice issue of forced child labor. The Berkeley Center will publish my fuller report later this year, and I encourage you to check the website then. So while the legal working age in Cambodia is 15 years old, a 2012 study by the World Bank revealed that an estimated 1 in 4 Cambodian children between the ages 5 and 17 is forced to work due to extreme poverty. So that means that there are over 1.5 million child laborers in Cambodia today, and over 75% of them work in hazardous conditions. So many of these children are put to work in their families' rice fields for 12 hours of manual labor a day. Others are work in brick factories, clothing factories, or in small family-run convenience stores. So as my fellow volunteer, a Cambodian woman with over 15 years working in education, she told me, the parents tell the children, quote, "Why do you need to go and study if your family doesn't even have 100 real to buy something? You need to work." Except for in primary school, the children have to work in the field. And 100 real, just for your perspective, is about 25 cents. So another notable trend has developed within the last 15 years. As Cambodia struggles economically, its western neighbor Thailand has experienced relative economic success and minimal monetary inflation. So one driving force behind this disparity is the damage that the Khmer Rouge did not only to the Cambodian people during the genocide, but also the damage they did to the process of development, both social and economic. So parents often will leave for Thailand to earn income, forcing their children to go with them and thus pulling them out of school. Many of the children go to the Thai border, will pick up trash or beg in the streets or even work in the sex trade. And child labor is a crucial threat to children of all ages in Cambodia, but it's especially detrimental to children aged 9 to 11. At this age, between primary and secondary schools, children are getting big enough and strong enough to work in the fields or in factories under poor conditions, and that's the age in which they are most targeted by traffickers. So the forced labor of children, particularly at the pivotal age between 9 and 11, contributes significantly to the staggering dropout rates between primary and secondary school. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, this phenomenon is directly connected to and supplemented by the lack of parental support and physical inaccessibility to schools and financial inaccessibility to school. So what's being done about this? I identified 3 functioning strategies to reduce the dropout rates at this specific point in the child education. So the first is an establishment of hostel-like homes where gracious volunteers or religious workers will house poor children while they attend nearby schools. These hostel owners will often pay for the school materials and the class fees for the child to go to school. The second effort is community outreach and school building, and this entails reaching out to isolated rural communities, engaging the people, and generating support for a community-wide effort to build a school for the village's children. And the third effort, and that on which I will focus today, is the administration of rice scholarships. So most of the students are dropping out between primary and secondary schools as they're reaching the age of physical maturity necessary to work on their family's rice paddies. And identifying this trend of labor forced upon the child by their family, Father Kike and his team came up with a rice scholarship system that provides the family with a form of conditional compensation for allowing their child to attend school. So Kike's team calculates roughly how much the labor of a child between the ages of 9 and 11 could produce, and to prevent those children from being pulled out from school and forced to work, the team takes that amount and provides this family with the same yearly equivalent in monthly increments. Assuming that the rice scholarship makes up for the child's absence in the field, the rice donation is conditional on the child's consistent attendance and performance in school. So with alcoholism and gambling addictions rampant in Cambodian culture, specifically in male heads of households, the education team provides the family with rice instead of cash to prevent the family from spending irresponsible and still taking the child out of school to produce the rice that's necessary to live. So in turn, this method puts the focus on what really matters in this situation, and that's the child's education. So talking to the family recipients of the rice scholarships in Cambodia was definitely the most compelling and inspiring part of my trip. I walked away after 3 weeks of research with a really deep admiration for the resiliency of the Cambodian people. Just 30 years after more than 1/4 of their population was brutally wiped out, I spent 3 weeks living among some of the most humble, the most grateful, the most hardworking, and most of all, the happiest people I've ever encountered. So I often marveled at how Father Kike and his team are able to continue working so hard towards educational equality in Cambodia with such trying circumstances and little funding. But then you see the faces of the kids, and above all, these children really just want to go to school with their friends, and they want an education. And so that's why you're reminded that this work is so important. So thank you for your time, and take a look at my report that will be published in 2014. Thank you very much.
Our next presenter is Senior Mishal Shah, who is a government major and Justice and Peace minor. Mishal is this past summer's David F. Andretta Summer Research Fellow. David Andretta was a double Hoya, a graduate of the college and the Georgetown Medical Center. He was known to be a true son of Georgetown, a man with a vivacity and energy for life's adventures and serving humanity. To honor his life, his family, who are here today with us, established the Explorer Fund, which provides a summer research scholarship of $5,000 for a rising senior. Mishal's commitment to engaged research on issues of human dignity and her dynamic persona made her an ideal recipient of the scholarship to recognize David. Mishal.
Thank you, Dr. Whistler, for the introduction. My name is Mishal Shah, and I'm honored to be this year's recipient of the David F. Andretta Summer Scholarship. I feel extremely blessed to have been taught and mentored by Professor Andretta, who's here today, both as a freshman and a sophomore. So it's truly a privilege to carry on the legacy of her son as an Andretta Fellow. The title of our presentation is The Khwaja Siraz, Pakistan's Endangered Minority. And before I actually delve into the actual research I did this summer, I will begin by discussing the context of transgenders in Pakistan and how I became interested in the topic. So in the South Asian context, transgenders are referred to as Khwaja Siraz in polite company and as Hijras or Khusras otherwise. Those are more of the derogatory terms. And these are biological males who take on female identities, choosing to publicly dress and behave like women. They have a very strong historical place in the Indian subcontinent as well. They served as the caretakers of Mughal harems and made significant contributions to art, music, and poetry. Even though transgenders used to have a more respectable position in society, their status has significantly deteriorated over the years, forcing them into begging and prostitution. Khwaja Siraz isolate themselves in very close-knit communities where a member leader called a guru adopts a transgender child after they have been rejected or disowned by their parents at a very young age. And because most transgenders lose ties with their families and loved ones at a very young age, they become easy victims of extortion, abuse, and sexual harassment. So when I began thinking about my research, I was interested in understanding how transgenders live and what their lives are like, how they associate with each other and also within their community and with the rest of society. I was also curious to know what kinds of social justice challenges they face in their daily lives. And I wanted to learn more about the institutional systems and resources in place protecting the rights of transgenders. And when I began to read more about this topic, I quickly realized that there has been very little written on this and published, in terms of published literature, on the transgender community, specifically in Pakistan. Thus, this research attempts to fill that gap. So I'm sure a lot of you guys are wondering what made me interested in this topic, and I'm just going to share a personal anecdote. Growing up in Pakistan, my family employed a teenage boy as household help, and over the years he worked for us, I noticed that he had female-like tendencies and was particularly interested in dancing at weddings, birthdays, and other ceremonial occasions. And while he behaved and dressed like a male inside our house, he would change his identity when he was out in public with his transgender friends. And so my exposure to transgenders at a very young age compelled me to understand their lives and shed light on their daily struggles. So as I began researching and writing my proposal, these were the kinds of questions that really struck to me. So the first one is, how are transgenders perceived within Pakistani society? In what ways has the transgender community been discriminated against in Pakistani society? And what kinds of social justice concerns are within and of the transgender community in Pakistan? What steps have been taken by the government to address the concerns? And if they feel like they want to be brought into the mainstream, how can Pakistan truly integrate the transgender community into the mainstream society? So in terms of my summer travels, I started my research in Islamabad, the capital of Pakistan, where I collaborated with the local NGO, which works on grassroots human rights work around Pakistan. And this NGO is called Mehergar, and they helped me organize my interviews with bureaucrats and other government officials in Islamabad. During the next 3 weeks, I traveled to Lahore, where I partnered up with another NGO, Action Aid, and they helped me get in touch with Leila, who's one of the most prominent transgender leaders in Lahore. And through her, I was able to get access to her community, and then I was able to interview in Lahore through that. And then after a fruitful month and a half of research in Islamabad and Lahore, I moved on to Karachi, where I was able to meet another prominent transgender leader by the name of Bindya Rana. And Bindya Rana is the president of the Gender Interactive Alliance, and that's an NGO that's working to bring greater awareness to the concerns of transgenders. She also contested in the recent election for a seat in the Sindh Provincial Assembly. And during our interview, she spoke about the socio-political changes within the transgender community. And then through her, I was able to engage with the larger transgender community in Karachi. And most of the transgenders I spoke to were very open and honest when I interviewed them because I gained access to them through their leaders and through the different NGOs. And a lot of them had already been interviewed by other media sources and journalists in the past, so most of them are very open to and receptive. In terms of my methodology, I conducted live interviews, and if my interviewers allowed me, I would film their interviews so I could go back and just fact check. And a lot of my research was based on observation from my interviews, just casual conversation and meeting them in the marketplace. So in terms of my findings, I had many findings, but I'm just going to be sharing the most important ones. From my engagement with the community, I found that there are 3 types of people who qualify as transgenders in the Pakistani context. The first types are biological males who like to act and dress like females. The second are biological males or females with ambiguous genitalia who choose to identify as females. And the third types are biological males who grow up around female siblings and start to acquire female tendencies, and over time they identify as females. My second finding was something that was very surprising to me. After speaking to many transgenders, I found out that there has been a significant increase in fake transgenders, boys or men who basically cross-dress as women to make extra money. And this trend has occurred more recently and is tied with the poor economic condition in Pakistan. And then my third finding is linked to the idea of corruption. And there's been corruption has become a more prevalent trend within the community. Instances of criminal activities such as murder, gang violence, and drug abuse have become more frequent than ever before. And through my interviews, I have found that the gurus actually play a very influential part in promoting criminal activity by forcing their students into fraudulent activity to bring in more money. And my third finding has to do with the actual rights of transgenders. I found that although transgenders have been granted the right to a third category on the national identity cards, implementation of this judiciary ruling has been extremely poor. transgenders whom I spoke to were complaining that the paperwork has complicated the process. So just an example, when you're applying for a national ID card, you need your parents' ID card copies as well. And because many of the transgenders have lost ties with their actual biological parents, they can't get that paperwork done. So that's another hurdle they're facing currently. And lastly, the social stigma continues to persist. Many Pakistanis I spoke to blame transgenders for their struggles, and they are continued to be viewed as lazy and objects of mockery and ridicule. And the last discovery is that actual needs of transgender people are often misrepresented. I found that the number one thing that transgenders want right now are just decent jobs that will provide them with enough financial stability to avoid prostitution or begging. And this is a good segue. Well, this is a good quote that exemplifies the need for human dignity and respect. A lot of them are craving at the moment. One of the people I interviewed said, "We're deprived of love, and the only thing we get are people's curses, beatings, and harassment. Journalists and students have interviewed me several times for documentaries. But look at me. I'm in the same place begging the same streets every night. The only thing we want from Pakistani people is to take a peek into our lives and see that we are human." And this is a very powerful quote that serves as a good segue into my next slide, which is how this entire research connects to social justice. So by using a human rights approach, my research examines the different forms of discrimination at play within the transgender community. And by examining the injustice and oppression of one of the most disadvantaged communities across South Asia, my research highlights these people's lives and sheds light on their struggles. Moreover, because my study is framed within the Pakistani context, my research focuses on understanding the deep-rooted cultural and structural violence which allows for this mistreatment to go on. I look at how transgenders have been systematically excluded from politics, from the economy, from the school system, and how this has perpetuated them and pushed them to the margins. And lastly, because social justice is based on human dignity as an ethical foundation, my research highlights this point, and we see that because through the transgender research, I've noticed that they're not given the respect and the human dignity that all other Pakistani citizens are able to enjoy, and for them justice will remain an ideal until this is changed. So in terms of next steps, I'm using my summer research and applying it to my senior thesis for my Justice and Peace Studies minor. And I'm also working on a short documentary at the moment. So from all my clips and interviews that I've conducted, I'm hoping to compile them and using them and showcasing them to the greater Georgetown community. And I also have a lot of photography from the summer, so I'm hoping to show that to the rest of the Georgetown community. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you all for listening, and if you guys have any more questions, I'm happy to answer that at the end of all the other presentations. Thank you.
Our next team of presenters hail from Rhode Island. Maggie and Katie are sisters and both seniors in the college. Maggie is studying history, environmental studies, and justice and peace studies, and Katie is studying government and Arab studies. With the 100 Projects for Peace Award, they traveled to Kenya this past summer.
So I'm just going to start by talking a little bit about the grant that we received. So 7 years ago on her 100th birthday, Catherine Davis chose to celebrate by donating $1 million to Projects for Peace, and now the Davis Foundation continues this tradition. And every year they donate $1 million to 100 student-run projects all over the world. So we just want to take this opportunity to thank them for their generosity and their support, because without them we wouldn't have been able to do this project. So now Maggie's going to talk a little bit about the current problems facing Kenya, some of the issues, and then why our project was relevant.
Okay. So just to give you a little background on why we chose Kenya and why we chose this project in particular. Kenya is facing a host of environmental challenges at the moment, stemming from deforestation during the colonial and post-colonial era, and the resulting challenges from that, such as erosion. Another issue that we encountered while we were there was waste management is a huge issue in the country, and also a rapidly expanding population complicates these issues. And while we were writing our original proposal, we had in mind the 2007 post-election violence and the threat of violence during that ongoing election process. And so the idea of bringing people together over something positive, such as environmental protection, greatly influenced and shaped our project and our aims and goals. So we decided to sort of frame it within the context of peace education. And peace education is the process of acquiring the values, knowledge, and skills to live in harmony with oneself, with others, and with the natural environment. So we sort of latched on to the last part of this definition and focused on sort of the relationship between human society, and the natural environment, and recognizing that they are intricately intertwined. Human well-being and environmental well-being can't really be separated. So this is what we focused on in our workshop, which Katie will talk about right now.
So before going to Kenya and while we were there, we worked very closely with the Jesuit Hakimani Center. And they're an organization dedicated to the study of issues of Christian faith, social justice, and peace building. And they're very involved in facilitating trainings for various groups across the country. So their methodology really influenced the way that we did our project. We weren't originally planning on doing a workshop, but it seemed like the best way to kind of get the information across, and it's pretty well accepted. So they mainly focus on political empowerment and engagement. So this was the first part of our project. It was a three-part project. We did a workshop in Kisii County, which is Western Kenya, and it was 2 days. On the first day, we had a representative from the Hakimani Center come and talk about creative thinking and innovation, different ways to address problems facing Kenya today. And then on the second day, we facilitated discussion and activities on the relationship between peace and the environment. And then in the afternoon, we brainstormed some environmental problems facing Kisii County in particular, and then applied some of the creative thinking methods that we talked about the day before to see if we could come up with creative solutions to these problems. So some of the problems that we identified were mentioned earlier, such as deforestation, erosion, waste management. So this was it was actually a really interesting part of the project, not thinking that we were going to do it going in. I definitely learned a lot from it, so I'm hoping that they got as much out of it as well. Maggie will talk about the second part of our project, which kind of stems from the workshop. We worked with some of the same people.
So we wanted to move the project out of the academic and theoretical into more practical realm. So what we decided to do was we worked with some of the participants from the workshop and Our Lady of Victory Parish, and we planted trees on a site that had been exploited for firewood. So this site is now owned by the church there, and the pastor is in the process of reclaiming it as both from an environmental perspective and as a site for reflection by community members. And so his goal is to have a quiet space outside of the city where people can connect with the environment. And we ended up planting 96 trees and various cacti. And we got some great feedback from this section because people were really excited to be able to implement and enact some of the principles that we talked about the day before. And so now Katie's going to talk about part 2 of this part of the project.
So this is the second more practical project that we did. When we first arrived in Kenya, we went straight to Kisii to do site evaluations of places that we thought we wanted to work with. And one of the places we visited was an elementary school. So we had a few projects in mind going in, but when we talked to them, they really identified their major need as a water pump, because they had a borehole, but it didn't have a pump, so it's just an open hole in the ground. So one, it's not very sanitary and it's easily contaminated, but there's also a lot of little kids running around, so it's very dangerous for them. So we really wanted to, it wasn't originally in the plan or the budget, but we really wanted to be able to provide them with a water pump. So that's the picture on the left. They're building the foundation for it. And then on the right, these are trees that were planted. So we really wanted to engage the kids in getting them thinking about their relationship with the environment. So a few of the teachers who were at the workshop also worked at the school. So they planted 2,000 seedlings that will be used as a source of revenue for the school. So it's a more sustainable income for them to be able to make improvements. And we actually were hoping to plant the trees with the kids, but when we arrived, we found out they'd planted them all the previous day because the teachers were really excited about the project, so they'd just gotten them all done. But it was fun. We spent the afternoon getting to know some of the kids and seeing the project, so it was good. This is a picture of the water pump. It's almost complete. This was the hardest part of the project, I think, because we started working on it the day that we got the day that we arrived, and it wasn't fully installed and functioning until the day that we flew out of the country, so we were never actually able to see it complete. They still have to add the concrete base to it, but it is functioning. I believe they've done that since then. So yeah, it took quite a long time. The man in the picture is Anthony. He was instrumental in helping us complete our project. We really realized the importance of having someone on the ground who's very familiar with the local culture and business practices. So he was great in helping us and represented Georgetown with the hat.
Okay, so despite all the challenges we faced in the workshop and the other projects, our time in Kenya was an incredibly valuable experience. We gained insight into a totally different community, and they welcomed us with open arms. So we spent our 5 weeks completely stuffed with food and tea, and we're always welcomed anywhere we went. So this picture was taken at the school, and the woman all the way on the left was one of the teachers that came to the workshop and then planted the trees with the students. She's holding Julius, our chicken, which was our thank you present from our work with the school. Yeah, I just can't stress enough the way that we were welcomed into the culture and the Kenyan ideas of hospitality, and the ways that we were able to learn so much more, I feel like, than we were able to give. So we'd like to conclude our presentation here with that, but we have one more point to mention. In the last days of our time in Kenya, we had the opportunity to visit other organizations in the area, in particular in Nairobi. So this is a picture of the Kibera Power Women Group. And the group is an organization of 20 women living and working in Nairobi's largest slums. They're all HIV positive, and they're committed to supporting their families by working together to sell their handicrafts and stuff. And so we have outside the door a table of bracelets and necklaces, and the money that we raise will go back to their projects. And what they're working on is providing sanitary pads for young girls so they don't have to miss as much school. So that concludes our presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions after the final presentation. So thank you.
Our last presenter is Nick Wurst. Nick is a graduate of Georgetown with degrees in government and English. After graduating, he moved to India to work with an Indian NGO providing media and legal advocacy on land right issues, and then returned as a Fulbright grant to conduct research he will share with us today. Nick is also currently a program coordinator for the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labor and the Working Poor here at Georgetown. Nick.
I'm Nick. I went to India right after graduating, and then I went back on a Fulbright research grant. And when I went back, I was looking at a particular set of issues, in particular, energy and democracy in India. And democracy is obviously a very large term, encompasses a lot of things. But I was trying to focus more on what does local democracy look like in India, and how do you navigate development projects that affect local communities. So what's the extent of a say a community might have in a development project that would have huge impact on their way of life, on their community, on the resources they have. So first, I think to even understand why that research would be even remotely relevant, it's important to look at what is the current state of access to electricity, to energy in India. So right now, India, at the time I was doing my research, it was about 1.2 billion people. I think now it's pushing closer to 1.3 billion people. That's just massive. And right now, approximately 800 million people have access to electricity, and about 300 to 400 million more have intermittent access, or no access at all. And of the 800 million, I should point out, when I say access to electricity, that's a relative term to what we deal with here. And in fact, the reason why I even got interested in this when I was in India, so initially I was there working with an NGO, not on energy issues. And I lived in this guest house, and in the guest house, there was no AC, it was kind of open. You could use a mosquito net, but at night, mosquitoes would certainly try and bite you. Probably the best defense mechanism against mosquitoes, though, was this rotating fan on my ceiling. And it was just powerful enough to create like a little bit of wind that made it difficult for mosquitoes to land on me. So I would, flip on the switch, this thing would start going, I'd go to sleep. But then in the middle of the night sometimes, power would cut out. And you would wake up because you're getting bit by mosquitoes all of a sudden at 2 a.m. So, this happened enough times. And also, it would be very hot, of course. So that fan was very crucial for that aspect too. And this happened enough times that, you wake up in the middle of the night and you haven't got anything to do, so you're sitting there wondering like, well, I wonder why my fan's out. And I wonder why there isn't any power in this town. And I wonder why there isn't any power sort of like in this region of India. Like, I wonder what's happening here. So anyways, that's sort of what drew me to this research. Also, walking up and down the streets, this is a photo from Delhi, and that's where I was based when I was doing research this time. This is a street from Old Delhi, and it's sort of in an old section of the city. And you can see there's this massive tangle of wires attached to the electricity hookup. And this is how a lot of folks in that part of the city get their electricity. Now, most of those wires there, I'd say probably 90% of the wires you're looking at are illegal. They're not supposed to be there. But this is how folks would tap into the grid and siphon off electricity, and that's how they keep their fans running in their house. And the reason for that is the grid is just not big enough. It's not been expanded enough. And so India is faced with this giant conundrum of, okay, how do we provide that level of development for folks? So they have tried to come up with programs to provide this stuff, and they've been spotty at best. I think it's a noble effort, but it really hasn't achieved the goals that it's looking to achieve. So the title of the program from the central government of India is the Rajiv Gandhi Gramin Vidyutikaran Yojana program, essentially. But it's the overall national effort to try and provide access to electricity for everybody in the whole country. That's a huge undertaking. They're making progress. It's not quite as fast as they want, though. So this comes down from the national look, though. Let's take a look at what happens when you get down to a community. Now, in particular, the way I approached my research, I was much more interested in going out and interviewing folks and trying to get a sense of how these competing forces, development and local democracy and participation, how do these things sort of interact? So to do that, what I did was I essentially reached out to NGOs. I reached out to lawyers, to advocates, to activists, to mining companies, to power company officials, to the government officials, really like private sector, public sector, and everything that's sort of half in, half out of those categories as well. My approach was very much around like interviewing it. So I would say my approach was a bit more sort of like on a reporter side of things as opposed to strict academic research. And in the end, that's sort of what I did. I wrote like a series of short essays about what was going on. To give you an idea of sort of the problems that come up, it's important to know what are the laws governing the situation to begin with. Now, India has this incredible tool at its disposal that we also have at our disposal in how we settle issues affecting our communities. And that is for local democracy around big development projects, they have public hearings. These public hearings are critical because this is maybe the one chance you're going to have to voice your problems with what's going on, to bring up the questions you want answered. Now, the reason they have a public hearing at all is because of the set of laws that you're looking at here. So in '94, the Environmental Impact Assessment notification was put in place. It was updated in 2006. The Panchayat Extension to Scheduled Areas law essentially affects tribal communities, very similar to, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar to Native American reservations here. And a lot of the development projects are taking place on tribal land in India. And the Right to Information Act is another critical element that means you have the access to documents that would affect your community. So all these sort of combine together into one critical event. And that's what I was looking at. And that's the Environmental Impact Assessment public hearing. So for any major project, and especially coal power plant projects, which is what I was focused on, they have an assessment. And as part of that assessment, you have to have a public hearing. So at that public hearing, you have government officials up on a podium, you have company officials up there, and several other like local leaders. And their role in this situation is to essentially field questions from their community. And then they're also required to answer those questions. Now, for any public hearing to be effective, you can't just show up and say like, okay, well, I got a question. You need to know what you're asking about. So it's critical that you have access to the information ahead of time. So there's a report you're supposed to receive in advance of a public hearing. It's supposed to be widely circulated. It's supposed to be translated into multiple languages. So that isn't always what happens. And frequently, it's sometimes very difficult to tell where something fell apart just because it wasn't competently run. The process wasn't carefully taken over and run effectively. And then sometimes it is actively manipulated by folks who stand to gain. And I think this serves as a very good example. So this is actually a document that villagers showed me in Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh is a state in the center of India, and it's become known as the power hub of India. And the reason for that is the chief minister has decided to build enormous numbers of power plants, of coal power plants. They have a lot of coal fields in Chhattisgarh. And so their goal is to build way more power than they could possibly use for their own state and effectively export it to the other states around the country. So since they're in the center, this is very easy for them to do, geographically speaking. Now, this here was shown to me by a local activist who was telling me about how they came to the village and asked, like, well, do you have any issues? No. Okay, well, then can you sign over your land? Yes. And this is a document essentially signing over land for these projects. And there are a lot of signatures here. And essentially it was initially done to sort of further speed along the project. However, none of the people who signed this actually signed this. Actually, these are all forged signatures. And when he showed me other documents, you could see it was like in the same pen ink. All the writing looked exactly the same. There are a lot of things like that crop up in these situations. However, the oversight is very limited. So coming back to these public hearings, sometimes you run into problems where it's just not going to be effectively run. So in the case in Chhattisgarh that I was checking out, they were building a power plant there, and they were going to have this public hearing. Now, as part of the public hearing, they needed to distribute a report ahead of time, just let everybody know, what's this power project going to be? How big will it be? How much water will it use? And they didn't distribute the report. When they did, it was a tiny summary, and it was in English, not in Hindi. Local folks were very upset about this. So they showed up to the public hearing, and they protested. The protests, it disrupted the public hearing, certainly. Then police came in and started to push out the protesters, and then the protesters retaliated. And eventually these things start to spiral out. If people don't feel like they're getting a say and they're going to lose everything, you're going to have some violent reactions at some point. So at certain points, for this particular public hearing, stones started to get thrown. Villagers were attacking the police were attacking back. Depends on who you talk to, but everybody says that someone else started it first. And it's very hard to trace it back and figure out what went wrong. The reason you end up with a situation like that, though, is people don't feel like they are being listened to begin with. And that was very much the case here. I feel like I've already sort of run through some of these key elements here. But this is the power plant that actually was built in Chhattisgarh, initially with the intention of being only 1,800 megawatts, which, if you don't know anything about megawatts, that's fine. All you need to know is it's massive. This is a huge power plant. The problem was they had a public hearing to discuss an 1,800 megawatt power plant, which is huge. And they looked at the resources available and all that. Once it was built, though, they expanded it by doubling it. They created it, turned it into 3,600 megawatt power plant. So then it was very clearly strained the resources of the community. More people were displaced. Those are the sorts of things that come up in that situation. So I'll tell one other quick story about sort of what happens when this sort of thing goes wrong. Now, luckily in this case, because the community mobilized, because they got actively engaged in pushing back, they managed to get media coverage, and they managed to find some backers in Delhi who are lawyers and take on public interest cases. And so now that case is pending in sort of the fast-track national court for environmental issues. So they've managed to stall the expansion of that power plant and slow things down, give themselves a chance to sort of make sure they get properly compensated and they don't lose access to water in the area. There was another case, though, and this was actually before my Fulbright research when I was there with the NGO. I went out on a field visit to check out a site where a community essentially was placed on top of a bauxite deposit. Bauxite's used to make aluminum, but it was a very similar issue in that the community needed to have a say in the development project that was coming in. So a company wanted to mine the bauxite out of this hillside. And so far, they hadn't been able to, but I didn't know why. So I went out there with the field organizer from the organization. We go up the hill, and about halfway up the hill, we turn around and realize that we're being followed up the hill by a number of people from the village. And they're slowly coming up behind us. So we go up to the top, we're looking around, and then we see more people have joined us on top of this hill from the other side. So behind us were these men coming up the hill with like sticks and other things, and then these women come up on the other side in their saris, and they're wearing, and they've got like rope and more sort of makeshift weapons essentially, because they thought that I was from a mining company. They thought that there was another guy who was with us who was older, and he was old white guy from England actually, so he definitely looked like he was from a mining company. Anyhow, they were very upset, and fortunately we had a very capable field organizer who had a lot of cachet with the community, was able to talk to them, explain that no, we were here from an NGO that's very focused on protecting land rights, making sure that you don't lose your land. And at that point things calmed down a little bit, but I had this up a little bit earlier, and I think it's more illustrative than what I can sort of explain. But basically, at that point, they insisted on showing us exactly how serious they were about protecting their land. So they'd brought sickles with them, they'd brought axes, and they were telling me that like, oh yeah, we were going to chop your head off if you had been here from the company. And I was like, oh, that's really funny. But turns out there had been somebody who'd come up there before. And actually, I'm not going to try and fiddle and show you these pictures at this point, but essentially, they had gotten violent in the past. They had essentially seriously injured somebody who'd come up there from the company. They had injured somebody from the local village who'd been trying to help the company. And I think what you're really seeing here is that a lot of times that is the course things take if you don't have an outlet for democracy. So if you don't have an outlet for public participation. So anyhow, there's some clear things that could be done to change that situation. One would be to have public hearings earlier, to have them more frequently, and make sure that folks are engaged in this stuff, and make sure that the questions of community are answered and the regulations are followed to protect them from negative side effects of the projects. But it remains to be seen what course things will take in India, and things are sort of coming to a boiling point, it seems. So anyways, it'll be interesting to watch what happens in the future. Hopefully things work out.
I really want to thank them for putting together these presentations for us today. I know that you guys have very full lives, and we're really glad that you shared this work with us. And I think that that in itself is part of social justice research, that broader impact of teaching other people about these issues around the world. So one last round of applause.